In this second part, let's now focus on the capacities and limitations of early warning systems and technological solutions to inform better conflict risk management and humanitarian relief. The panelists will outline how aid financing must take account of climate and conflict risks and how to drive people-centered anticipatory action and create strategic synergies across different sectors in programming and in funding. Without much further ado, allow me to hand you over to Ms. Sagal Abshir, Environment Security Unit Head, UNEP, as your moderator. A round of applause, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back from lunch. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, all protocols observed. This is the after lunch slot, so I know everybody's well fed and full of energy. So good afternoon, my name is Sagal Abshir, and I am the head of the Environment Security Unit at UNEP. And we look at the linkages between the environment, climate change, and peace and security dynamics, so very happy to be here. Earlier today, Ambassador Hannah Tete said something that I thought was very relevant for this panel. She said, we have the knowledge and the technical expertise in this region to do what needs to be done, and I'm very honored to be here with this panel that is precisely this expertise that she referred to. So let me first introduce my esteemed panelists. We have here on my left, Dr. Sunday Okello, conflict analyst for IGAD's Conflict Early Warning and Response Mechanism. Sitting next to him, we have Dr. Kwesi Sankulot Greenwich. He's a peacebuilding and natural resources management expert at the World Food Programme. And on the far left, Taye Abdelkader, Senior Technical Member of the Continental Early Warning System of the African Union. So this panel is titled Overcoming Obstacles and Strengthening Synergies, but I have another name for it. It's the Moving from Analysis to Action panel, and really about how we get things done in this space. And two ways that we're going to look at it. One is how to move from actually having the information. We do have early warning experts here, and we all know that early warning really has value when we can act on it. So how to move from having the information and the technological solutions to actually intervening to reduce the conflict risks. And the second theme really is how to partner, because of course we can't do any of this alone. No one institution can do this alone. And so who should we be doing, taking this action with, and what kinds of collaboration and building what kinds of synergies? And so handing over to the panel, they, like I said, they integrate climate risks into early warning systems. They identify the needed actions. And then their job is really the difficult one of feeding this information to decision makers to take the action. So with that in mind, I'd really like to invite, I'll start with Dr. Okello here on my left from IGAD, who can maybe give us the regional perspective of what are the main obstacles that you come across in doing this work, and also the synergies and collaborations.
Thank you very much. I would like to take the opportunity that I've been privileged to come and give my views and attend this very important conference. I'm so privileged, and I'm happy to share my experiences and also my knowledge in this forum. I would like to start with one key issue. If we believe that climate change is posing existential threat to human peace and security, if we all agree then I think I'm sitting in the right place. So if we still disagree, then we will go to the discourses of looking for the nexus, these definitions and all sorts of things. Because I believe at this point, our starting point should be climate security actions. We have done a lot of research, we have done a lot of analysis, we have done reports, conferences. Where are the action points? So at C1, where I sit, we have a very robust system that collects data from the local population all the way up to the national. And we produce regional reports that warn the countries, the region about conflict early warning. And the indicators are economic indicators, social indicators, governance indicators, environmental indicators, and security indicators. So with that, we have a robust system. And I want to reiterate the word mentioned here by the director of ICPAC, that in terms of conflict early warning, we are up to 85% accurate. We know. Our early warning informs us clearly that things are going to happen, but responses are still a problem. We knew Sudan would fall down. To what extent, probably could not tell, but we knew Sudan was going down. We knew a lot of things that would be happening with Al-Shabaab, climate change, and so forth. So with that in mind, I would like to confirm that, yes, our early warning system is very robust. Now, coming clearly onto some of the important key issues of peace and security, I want to share with you that as early as 2 months ago, we sat and brought key actors, key experts in the region to sit and tell us what are some of these key issues that we are facing in the region today in terms of peace and security. And we built up those issues successively, and we are going to present these reports to the Committee of Permanent Secretaries, Ministry of Foreign Affairs for IGAD, next month on the 28th, I think 27th, 28th. And I would be presenting these issues to them. One is governance deficit. It took number one priority risks in the region. There are so many issues packed in there. Another is economic challenges. We're looking at economic challenges, and I will get into the detail about that later. And then security challenges of all dimensions. Now, role of external actors. I will have a concluding remark, if time allows, about these external actors. There's also mismanagement of gender, ethnic, and religious diversity in the region now, increasing. And number 6 is climate change risks, which is what we are supposed to be talking about today. And then the management of land and natural resources. Out of that, the issues of climate change risk connects to all the others. So if we are talking about the synergies, I'll be referring to all these key issues of challenges. And we build scenarios that actually project actions necessary to address all these issues. So let me come to, again, your question that you wanted me to address. I was privileged to be part of the Berlin conference in October last year. I went to Berlin and we sat down there. I think it was 11th to 12th of October. And let me remind the House what we discussed. We discussed on multilateral cooperation. And we talked about inclusivity. We talked about locally informed action. And we talked about multiplier risk factors of climate change, on conflict and security. And we talked at length about that. We came up with some action points. We also discussed on the most urgent and cross-cutting issues in climate security, on addressing climate security. We discussed details and substantive agenda for implementation of peace and positive climate action at the local, national, global levels. After that, we took all these issues to Sharm el-Sheikh, and Sharm el-Sheikh somehow discussed that, but my director here talked about the outcome of what we discussed, And now at IGAD, we have the coordination mechanism on climate security, which ICPAC is driving together with UN Special Envoy in the region, together with myself sitting at C1, coordinating. I'm sure my colleague Linda is sitting there, and she'll be talking about some of these action points later. So why did we do that? Why are we looking at that? Key issues at local level don't really come to the national level. I might be talking too much, you will stop me, but I want to give you one example of a study that we did. We did a study together with FAO, Interpeace, and C1. And we went on the ground, and I was in Omorate area in southwestern part of Ethiopia. Those colleagues of my Ethiopian colleagues, you know the geography. And we went to a community, and we were told an elder who was very well respected had over 20,000 herds of cattle. And within 2 weeks, he lost all the animals because of drought, distance to water, and he could not stand because of the shame. He lost all his pride, and he committed suicide. Another one was losing his 5,000 heads of cattle, and he was going towards the same. He was rescued, but he became insane. At one angle, the water that River Omo was providing could not be pumped, could not be accepted for irrigation to give water to the community. However, the positive part of it, we found women were transforming from conflict, victims of conflict, to development. And they were growing hay production, they were doing hay production for animals. Now, that taught me a lot. How could we have not prevented this to happen? If climate change is so intensive to the extent that it clears of 20,000 herds of cattle in 2 weeks, and to what extent would we live with this kind of catastrophe if we don't do something? That's why in the beginning I said, if we believe that the threats that climate change is posing is real, then we are sitting in the right place and discussing the right issues. So I'm privy to more discussions and more questions that might be coming. My colleagues are also here. I don't want to talk at the political policy level. I am more to the community-driven aspects of discussions. And I can discuss the policy level, but I think I'm better placed to give you more information, more ideas, and more actions that need to take place from the bottom up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and we'll come back to that bottom-up topic. But thank you for highlighting again just how hard it is to move from having accurate predictions to the responses that are needed, and also reminding us of the breadth and interconnectedness of the risks, and also reminding us that we had this conversation last year, and we're here again having it. But let me bring in Taye Abdulkader, who can maybe take us from the regional to the continental level and give us the AU perspective on these obstacles and synergies, please.
Thank you, Sagal. Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to begin by thanking Adelphi and the Kenyan government for organizing this wonderful event. Thank you, Sandy. You actually created the context for our discussion really well. Again, I would like to emphasize most of the things that we discuss here are going to be technical, but unless they are going to influence our political decision making, we are not going to make a kind of difference on the ground. And we need to be creative enough, we need to be calculative enough in order to create technical solutions that are going to cater for the consumption of our political decision makers. In addition to that, also, the involvement of all actors is very relevant, whether we are doing early warning or we are actually dealing with early response aspects. The other aspect that I would like to also emphasize is the involvement of most specifically local actors, in the form of civil society organizations or even member state agencies that are going to work hand in hand with the African Union or the regional economic committees or different agencies on the ground. The majority of the stories we hear on the ground is a kind of competition to available resources. We should really come out of that particular tendency. Otherwise, we are not going to help each other. Therefore, how can we synergize better in order to come up with a collective understanding of the situation on the ground so that we can utilize the available resources wisely and make a difference accordingly. Then, of course, I came from the African Union. I don't want to give any kind of introduction about the African Union, you all know. But the most specific thing I would like to emphasize here is one of the pillars of the African peace and security architecture, which is the continental early warning system, should really take into consideration aspects of climate-induced security risks, okay, because they are coming more and more common. And in the very original conception of the continental early warning system, we didn't see that coming. Therefore, the kind of indicators, if I say it that way, were not developed appropriately in order to capture certain issues of concern on the ground from our different data sources. But over time, we have been having some learning phases in order to modify those indicators in such a way that we can capture these specific related aspects of climate, peace, and security. And again, we are hoping prevention is much better, especially if our institutions are going to involve and invest more on structural conflict prevention issues. Therefore, the continental early warning system has been developing a number of tools and processes that are actually focusing on mitigating these structural issues. But I think I can say it this way, even if we are not supposed to touch that political angle, but our institutions are lacking the appetite to invest more on structural conflict prevention issues. They are really shying away into the more rewarding potential interventions. Mainly they are like crisis management, conflict management, mediation related issues, or a kind of firefighting issues. Okay, therefore, whatever early warning system we are having, in the end, should try to build upon building resiliencies in our own different communities. Without doing that, okay, we can actually be simply victims of climate change. Okay, therefore, the issue is not about really addressing disaster risk reduction or humanitarian interventions, but if we really look into the other angle in order to face the opportunity that we are having in building resiliencies in our different communities. Therefore, if we invest more on structural conflict prevention first, that are going to build local capacities, we are going to reap the dividend really well. Okay, but most of our institutions are actually shying away from that kind of an approach. And therefore, regarding that particular synergy, a typical example I can share is, of course, that particular aspect is provided to us in our protocol, the African Peace and Security Architecture, to work hand in hand with local actors, most importantly, civil society actors. As early warning systems, we need raw data, as Sunday mentioned earlier, and that particular raw data is going to come from our local sources. But as you're aware, we are covering 55 countries, and that is too wide to be covered. But at least we have got some exemplary synergies in West Africa, thanks to civil society umbrella like West Africa Network of Peace Builders, and in Southern Africa through the Southern African Partnership for Conflict Prevention, or SAPEC. And what we do hand in hand with this kind of institution is that, yes, they provide raw data based on the indicators we provided to them, but at the same time, we also try to do some kind of local-based thematic research that's going to influence our own analysis. And all in all, in that regard, we can build that level of synergy, and we can actually make the impact more. Back to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You covered a lot there. really appreciate you bringing that point about the importance of our institutions investing in a more longer-term structural response, and I think that's an important one maybe that we can take today. I'd like to bring in Dr. Kwesi here. From your perspective with World Food Programme, I mean, how do you see these obstacles and synergies? And specifically, I know that you're thinking about these food systems programming cycles and how some of this information can be used to influence those.
Thanks so much. Let me start by saying first, thanks to the Kenyan government for inviting us here. Thank you for the German Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and also thanks so much for Delphi for putting this together. Let me start with two confessions because I think it frees the soul. So the first confession is that my brother at the back in his question said, if you see his hands in his pocket, it's because he's cold and he's from West Africa. I am from even farther west than him, from the West Indies. So if you see me shaking, it is because I am freezing. They told me, come to Africa, enjoy the climate. This is not what I expected. I'm not built for this. That's confession number one. Confession number two is when I got the invite for this panel from Janani, I was of two minds. Do I come and sit and speak as a WFP expert on climate and climate security? Or do I come as an angry third worlder, upset that we're having these conversations again and that the financing is not there, the structures are not there, the mechanisms are there? There's always money for conferences. It seems that we just don't have the money for either loss and damages, we don't have the money for insurance, we don't have the money for anticipatory action, and we don't have the money for actually preventing the losses, nor do we have the willpower to move away from the addiction to fossil fuels that is fueling this climate change crisis. So I decided to do both. So I've come here as an angry third worlder from the World Food Programme. I've got my World Food Programme suit and my angry third worlder tie. So I've done both. What I'll try to do in the next 5 minutes or so is tie together some of what we've heard from Dr. Sunday and some of what we've heard from Taye to explain a little bit as to how agencies like the World Food Programme, who are specifically focused on food, how we try to use this early warning information. So, first of all, why are we back here again? And why are we doing this in Nairobi as opposed to Accra or Dakar or South Africa? There is something peculiar about the Horn. It's a region that is going through multiple transitions, that is going through a demographic transition. It's going through a transition from rural to urban. It is going through an economic transition. It's going through political transitions. And on top of that, it's dealing with a change in the climate. Many other regions and countries are dealing with these crises, but here in the Horn of Africa, you could also say in the Caribbean, I have to plug my home region, you're dealing with all of these transitions at the same time. And as Nazanin said this morning, what the climate crisis is, it's a risk multiplier. It weakens people's resilience, it makes them more vulnerable to shocks, not only climate-related shocks, but other shocks. What we're trying to do as the UN, and in particular as World Food Programme, is building that societal fat that allows people to go through these shocks without collapsing. How do we do that? In the past, we did this in a very unstructured way, which was moving food, largely food from the West, from point A to point B, throwing it off the back of the truck. If it hit you in the head, we were sorry, but our hope was that this was the strategy. The climate crisis and the interaction between climate and conflict has forced us to be a little more strategic and has forced us to be smarter in the way we do our work. How have we done that? We've done that in three main ways. We've done it with better analysis. We've tried to understand better this bidirectional relationship between climate and conflict. And through our partnership with Adelphi, we've done a number of research projects where we've looked at the way climate impacts conflict and vice versa. My colleague Susanna Huber here has led on that research with Adelphi, and it's come up with some incredibly interesting findings for us. One is that it's not a direct causal link between climate and conflict. It's not from point A to point B. It's an incredibly complex web, and it affects different countries differently. One could build on what Alice said this morning about climate change affecting all of us. Climate change does affect all of us, but it affects us all quite differently. We've noticed from our research partnership with Adelphi that there are a number of societal groups that are more vulnerable. These include women, these include pastoral communities, and these include the urban poor. These are the groups that fall between the cracks. So as WFP, we've been trying to use the early warning research that we get from IGAD, from the African Union, to see how we can try to buttress some of the challenges of climate change through one, better analysis, through two, a broader range of partners that we work with. So initially it was quite simple. It was truckers, it was truck drivers. Now we try to deal with women entrepreneurs. We try to bring in pastoral communities. We work more closely with governments to ensure that we've got a broader range of partners so we can attack these challenges more systematically. Thirdly is we're trying to ensure that there's sustained action. And this is sustained action that allows communities to develop their own solutions to climate change, for us to support climate smart adaptations, and for us to support infrastructure that supports sustainable integrated food systems. So what does this look like? This is a lot of high level conversation. What does this look like? Let me give you one concrete example from our work in South Sudan. In South Sudan, we see, I guess it's not the image that we have in our heads of climate change. We think of climate change, we think of Somalia, we think of northeastern Kenya, we think of people's camels dying. In South Sudan, they're dealing with the exact opposite crisis. Around 40% of South Sudan is now more or less permanently underwater. These are areas where pastoral communities used to roam that are now under, in some cases, 3, in some cases, 4 meters of water. You've got entire towns now that are islands, and you have urban planners trying to deal with that crisis. How do you get goods in and out of a town that is now no longer connected to anything? In one particular part of South Sudan, in Jonglei State, in an area around Bor, we've had these flood waters that just haven't receded from the rivers. It's forcing local cattle herders there to move to drier areas. But lo and behold, those dry areas are inhabited by another community who are farmers who don't take well to pastoralists coming eating their crops. This is leading to a cycle of violence and revenge violence that is pushing those communities and those areas to the brink. What is the role then for a food security agency like WFP in a situation like this? We worked with partners within regional organizations, within South Sudan, within research institutes to understand this challenge more clearly. And what we understood was that there were structural ways to hold back some of these floodwaters. And in those flooded areas, WFP has helped communities, because it's not WFP doing it, it's the communities themselves. We've helped communities reclaim 1,643 square kilometers, which is around 160,000 hectares of land that was flooded. The dikes hold the water back. It allows pastoral communities to stay in their home areas. It allows women farmers to grow new crops that are water resistant, and it allows communities to live in a little bit more harmony than they would have had these communities been in conflict over natural resources. So what we've tried to do in being smarter around how we deal with the climate crisis is bringing that research from IGAD, is bringing that early warning from the African Union to understand where we can bring donor funding when it is there, when the donors do give funding, to allow it to be able to have this multiplier impact in some of these communities. This is what we're doing on the climate front. We're also trying to ensure that our work is both conflict and climate sensitive. So in places like Sudan, where you will have a rapid onset humanitarian emergency, we're looking to ensure that what we do there is not only conflict sensitive, but it looks ahead, that we're building solutions with communities that are also climate smart and that allow people to adapt to what may be unpredictable, but permanently unpredictable changes in climate. And that is the real tragedy of climate change. It's the unpredictable nature of it that leaves communities not knowing when they should plant, when they should move their animals, should they sell. As Dr. Sunday said, you have a large herd, but you don't know whether your herd will survive this current rainy season. So that's kind of what we're doing from our side as WFP, as an agency that's both humanitarian, development, and trying to dip our toe in the peace building field.
Thank you so much. Not just for reconnecting us to all of our emotions that we share with you, but telling us a bit about how you work and bringing it to the community level, and actually I will be opening this up to everyone for questions, but as the moderator, I'm going to take my liberty of asking a couple of questions first. And picking up on your point of sort of talking about the community level, I wanted to, this is a theme that's been there over the course of the day, about how it's important to focus not just at the policy level, but also, at communities. So I'm curious, and this is maybe for the colleagues from IGAD and the AU, how you see that linkage between the local and community level, and how that gets fed back up to the regional, international levels. How you see it working and how you see what you see in the challenges in terms of making it a feedback loop. I don't know who wants to go first.
Thank you, Sakal. Therefore, my focus is actually to give specific examples, maybe. That's a better thing. I see it in two ways. One way is how can grassroots level information can be channeled to the mechanisms, the processes, the tools, the methodologies that are available at the African Union level. That is one aspect. And the other aspect is when the African Union implemented certain processes that are going to be implemented at a member state level, what is the role of local community actors in implementing that? Okay, therefore, with regard to this particular aspect of bottom-up approach, it is mainly data collection, and that data collection can be facilitated mainly by local actors of different nature involved in CSO structure. In some scenarios, they can be also national human rights institutes that are working on the ground, that are channeling that information up, and that information can be analyzed at the continental level together with our regional counterparts of ECOWAS, IGAD, COMESA, etc. Okay, then we can deliver certain products to our decision makers. Okay, and this actually influence certain decision-making body. Okay, for example, the AUPSC is going to look after certain issues in order to make decision, and in order to influence that decision-making process, you are going to channel this kind of low-level information. And of course, policies, decisions can be considering those issues that are coming from down. Then the other aspect is if you go, especially we are experimenting some kind of self-assessment of our own member states and building national peace infrastructures at our member state levels. These national peace infrastructures can be in the form of many things. It can be National Peace Council in Ghana, or it can be Ministry of Peace in Ethiopia, it can be the National Cohesion and Integration Commission in Kenya. Okay, but all these kind of infrastructure should be capacitated and encouraged in order to make some kind of a difference. Or in certain high-level cases, a country may self-assess itself. Okay, we have a methodology derived from the Continental Structural Conflict Prevention Framework, which is a country structural vulnerability and resilience assessment. Only 3 countries undergo that, Zambia, Cote d'Ivoire, and Ghana. And when we are doing that self-assessment, it has got a very important aspect of it, country vulnerability mitigation strategy. Because that assessment method is going to identify your resilience, wonderful, okay, how to sustain that. But at the same time also it is trying to address issues of vulnerabilities. But you don't stop there. We need to mobilize certain resources, okay, in order to mitigate those vulnerabilities. Therefore, during the mitigation level, okay, it is not as such a kind of intergovernmental organization like the AU or the REX that are going to go down there, but we need lots of local actors in order to create that energy. And most of the things that are coming, of course, through this kind of assessments and also our data collection, is that aspect of climate exacerbating things. Okay, I always agree with Kwesi Dan Sunday. Okay, it is a risk multiplier that multiplies that particular certain risk. But the good aspect is now more and more our institutions are being opened up. For example, today there is a PSC CSO collaborative meeting, okay, facilitated by ECOSOC. It is happening today. Therefore, our institutions are being opened up in order to listen to those local structures. But again, in order to make a difference, we need some good political willingness and political leverage, to do actual action on the ground. Thank you very much. Maybe later, Prosper, if it is your session, please welcome to complement what I said. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think Taya has mentioned most of the things that I wanted to talk about. At the point of interactions between local community to the top, or up to the international, I would like to approach it in this way, that at C1, we look at these interventions at 3 levels. One is where we collect our raw data from, which is the community-based sort of data collection, which is local, very, very local. Can be even where 100 people live, and then we have a field reporter who feed into the system, and the system goes all the way to the regional and continental, and we share with TAI at the continental level. So we have interventions which are more project-based at local level. Then at the middle range level, we have programmatic approach. Programmatic in such a way that it gives us a number of projects from that program. One program, for example, gender development, then we have so many other projects. And at the international level and national level, we have policies. So if you have policy, programs, and projects. So at the level of intervention, we can have an approach that is either vertical and horizontal, that affects everyone. If you have policies at the top, how vertically can you translate it into actions? That's why I keep talking about climate security actions. How do you translate policies into actions? How do you translate policies into programs and projects? So that is one. The other approach is within the 3 levels, you have bottom-up and top-down approach, but also we introduce the inside-out approach. That means you locate yourself into programmatic area, and then you expand sideways so that you are able to reach, you are able to articulate, you are able to make changes. Now, having said that, not all projects, not all policies suit all these models of approaches. You need to be very aware of the policies. You need to be very aware of the community, what we call do no harm. I remember, because we were working in South Sudan, we were developing this training manual of do no harm for the government of South Sudan. And one of the things that I did not share with you, actually I didn't find you, was that when I went to Jongole Bor area, and the Murule were fighting the lone were, that was in August, and then December there was another big attack, and I was sent there to look at some of the issues, and I asked 2 questions to each community separately, and I asked, one of the questions I asked was, what does peace mean to you? How do you define peace? An elder. And he said, my peace, all these Murules have to be killed. And none should exist, because one Murule will disturb the entire community again and again and again. And we have lived with this kind of people. We don't want to see the Murule in this community. They are just pain. We don't want. Their absence is our peace. Then I asked him, what is security for you? And he said, bring me more guns. That is my security. I need more bullets. I need actions. I need to protect the security of my women and my children. Is the numbers of guns and the sophistication I have so that I can deal with these people. And I thought I was dreaming, because from my classroom of peace and security and all that, I've never had such a definition of peace, a definition of security. And the same question I posed was to the lone elder, exactly the same answer that I received. So our understanding of peace and security differs a lot. Our understanding and interpretation of approaches to finding solutions differ a lot. So if we begin to understand some of these small definitional issues of peace and security from the very local, and it still means insecurity for others, we still have a lot of work to do. So in all these areas, I have several points that I can elaborate. For example, how do we recognize various norms that we have, policies from the AU, from the conventional policies, and translate them into actions at the local level? And what kind of approaches do we need? We are looking at resource-based conflicts today the utilization, depletion, and all that. How do we design strategies that make us share these resources? Because they are actually diminishing. This morning I was hearing the representative who was talking about Lake Chad. Lake Chad is gone. It has affected communities who are farming. It has affected fishing. How do we share resources which are depleting? Peace processes are failing, and we don't know the modalities of implementing some of these peace agreements. In all the peace agreements that I've been studying, and we have participated in some of them in Juba, the LRA, I think you were there as well, and it's about power sharing. Go back to all these peace agreements, the results are all about power sharing. How much do I get? How many ministries will I be allocated? It's not about looking at the key issues of the society, women, children, post-conflict development, and sharing of natural resources, bringing economy back so that people can benefit. It's always about power sharing. And I can assure you on that. How do you control, for example, light weapons? Which is now, we talk about an approach that can broaden the civil space for populations. Now, as we speak, we have militarized politics, militarized ethnicity, monetized politics, monetized elections, and we are left with nothing else but to defend our own societies. We are left with nothing else but to carry guns. Can you imagine in some parts of Uganda when children are sitting for exams, at the door is a police officer with a military uniform, with a gun, protecting children from sitting exams. At the back of the room, there is another police officer who is standing there. You're supposed to sit for exams. And all our spaces are now militarized. You go to markets, there are guns. You go to schools, there are guns. You go to the roads, there are guns. You go to communities, there are guns. How do we demilitarize and make our civil space more democratic and peaceful? So those are things that also we have joint analysis. I have so many points that I could give to you, but I think for the purpose of time, I'll leave at that. And structurally, we need to look at structural approach. But I would also want to add something on systemic, because our peace and security structure is more looking at the systemic approach to conflict. We have embedded so many conflict issues one after the other. And if you're looking for root causes of resource-based conflict in the IGAD region today, you cannot just look at one issue. They are all so much systematically and structured in such a way that you need to disentangle all that is from the bottom, from the grassroots level, all the way up to government structures, police structures, military structures, and how it works out. So we should be looking at the systemic and the structural approaches to peace and security, and that translates also to climate security. Climate change is more systemic and structured in such a way that we should begin to look at the underlying issues systematically and structurally. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Did you want to add something on that before I open it up?
Just to be really, really brief, I'll continue with the theme and start with two confessions. Dr. Sunday, he looks very young, but he and I worked together 12 years ago in South Sudan, and we're still hearing the same conversations around climate change, around financing, around structuring. I used to have hair in those days, but I lost it. Dr. Sunday's kept his. The second confession is I feel at times when I hear Taye and Sunday talk, I feel a bit jealous. They're working for organizations that are much younger than the UN. IGAD developed in the 1980s, we're thinking that it was there in the 70s. Meanwhile, I work for an organization that was created for a world that no longer exists. It's a little bit the sick man of multilateralism. The structures were set up to avoid a great power conflict, to avoid a nuclear war, which is not our largest threat, and it's been slow, sluggish, and very, very simplistic in its move to dealing with climate change. So I would say don't look to the UN for support. Well, not for support. Don't look to the UN for leadership on climate change. look to the younger organizations that started looking at these issues like IGAD, look to the member states that are at the forefront of this because they're the ones who will have to deal with it. The UN is very good at putting together these forums, but in terms of action, it's where we kind of lack ability to get people moving in the same direction. And I think it also goes through with connecting the local to the global there too. We're not best placed to do that. We depend on our member states, we depend on the RECs, and we hope that they have more vibrance in them than the sick man of multilateralism at this point in time.
On that note, I'm going to open it up for the audience. Does anyone have any questions, comments, something they'd like to share? Yes, sir. Over there.
Good afternoon. My name is Shadrach Agaki. I just want to start from right where you've left, Daktari. We are not going to expect leadership from above. So that means we are going to start from below. So my question is to all of us, but I will get the answers and their views from them. How do we get the conversation moving from below going up? I mean, how do we talk about, in Kenya we have what we call public participation. But then we keep on asking ourselves about meaningful public participation. The people who are in South Sudan, who are experiencing floods, sometimes these people are not aware that this is climate change. So how do we start helping these people from below to start pushing policymakers? I want to give an example. I work for a legislator in Kenya. And one thing I've realized that so long as an issue becomes a public issue, then you have people acting. But if it is, we are quiet and nobody is talking about it, things is just run as usual. So as we sit in this conference, we go out after listening to all the analysis and the views that have been given. The question is, how do we start pushing this information to the people so that the people start demanding it? I think this will go to you, but it's a challenge also to all of us to start looking at the narrative that is running around and how do we shape that narrative such that it becomes something that people who are below understands. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have a comment over here.
Hi, my name is Susanna Humer from the World Food Programme. I have a question for both Dr. Kwesi and Dr. Sunday. Considering that you've both worked with the communities in terms of mediation, and Dr. Sunday, I thought your story of what someone's definition was of peace and what his definition of security was really interesting, because what we see in terms of communication, and this plays on the same comment or question that my colleague had just now, is on the communication part of climate change, particularly in speaking to those communities about climate change. I understand from reading an article that in Swahili there's not even a word for carbon. So how do you make these kinds of concepts, like how do we link peace and security to climate change, for example, particularly in those communities? How do we make that tangible for them? I know it's already tangible, but how do we incorporate that in how we speak to communities as well? Thanks.
Thank you so much. We'll just take one more question and then we can let the panelists respond to all the comments. Was there another one? Over there, please.
Thank you. So I think it's to Dr. Kwesi really about I didn't hear much of a mention of ecosystems, and I think one of the things I struggle with is that we talk about climate smart and climate work, but we don't talk about soil and soil health and the fact that we actually have the balance of the ecosystems. And so one of the big things I find is that we focus too much on fast responses trying to find technological solutions, but actually nature has the solutions, and we just need to have that balance and that brought into both the humanitarian and the development thinking and the security thinking. So that's sort of one question I had. To Dr. Tale, I think that one of the things I have about early warnings is, again, we don't link the early warning systems enough to our adaptation programming. And, you know, for example, we had the flooding in Somalia recently, and we did the preparation. So we did the early warnings, that went well, we saved lives, but we had 200,000 people displaced. They go, and then they have to come back often to the same areas. And there's no thinking around how do you integrate the early warnings with the adaptations. And actually, you know, we know often now where the hotspots are. Crisis Group and Nazanin are doing some great work on like hotspot mapping and how do we map those out. But what I feel like we're missing massively is this link between the early warning systems and the hotspots mapping of environmental degradation, where the ecosystems are degraded, where there's going to be conflict already there, and how do we integrate that much more? But yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much. So I think there was questions addressed to everybody separately, and please also address the first intervention, which was also very interesting, that we shouldn't wait for something or for support to come from somewhere above. Who wants to go first?
Okay. Leadership from below and how it can enhance climate, security, you know, nexus and development and all that. I think how do we make sure that the local community actually contribute into understanding of national and international recognition of leadership that helps the community. From the community point of view, as far as I've been working with the community for many years, there is something that I picked which is probably not yet well articulated in debates, and I picked that from Latin America, and that is how to build policy communities. Local policy communities, and it's being used in policing, police moving around, and is a very, very important concept in Europe, where you have community policing. But this has not been articulated, and Latin America has worked with this building local community policies, and that means the communities are sensitized, they're educated, they're informed, and they're provided for the local solutions that feed into informing strategies and policies at the national level. And that, I think we can still do that, because I've seen it working. And for example, Kobebe Dam is the place that I've seen Uganda government is beginning to build policy communities where pastoralists come and converge. Before you take your animals there, you are informed, you are told of your rights, your responsibilities, and your obligations, and if anything happens, what will happen to you. So you are informed. But those kind of approaches are not translated into policies, and we don't look at it as something important. And also, again, in South Sudan, communities who could actually be leaders at the local level get diverted into fighting for their lives, fighting for livelihood. They're not informed, and they are not even connected. We talked about providing them with social services. The roads from Jongule to Unity, you'll take like 5 weeks to reach by road, and because of what he has mentioned. Now, if we provide services to communities, people are linked up, children studying different schools in different areas, and people get informed, and we will reduce conflict. We get knowledge right at the bottom of the local level. So let us create development services, which is there in the community that we can do. There is another thing that I can also say, that so many leaders at the local level have become so comfortable with aid, and they depend so much on aid. People, things are being provided for them. I've seen this when I was working as a technical person, desert locusts for IGAD. And many people were sitting, and locusts are just coming, surrounding them without taking initiative of their own. And you see a situation that people are so dependent on aid, and if we can begin to remove people from dependencies to sustainable development. And I think even donors should listen to this, because we don't need to live on handouts all the time. We just simply need to move from the crisis point of view where we are to more sustainable development, more sustainable peace, more peaceful environment that we are able to take care of. Let me answer something about the mediation briefly. How do we incorporate all this into climate security debate? I'd actually about 4 points of transitions, for example. One is, I mentioned that we do very poor negotiations, peace agreements and peace negotiations, very poor in my view. We have experts, we have people who are mediators in the region, but our outcome for the mediation is very poor. Why? Because preventive, we fail to prevent relapse to conflict. So why do we go back to fight after negotiations? So it means there's something wrong in the beginning. And we fail to look at the responses, management, and all sorts of things. So I think we need to go back into that. Maybe in terms of climate, bringing the two together, we need climate adaptive sort of transitions. You talked about different transitions, but climate adaptive transitions, that can also enhance peace and security. Last but not least, I want to remind all of us that let us look at ourselves in IGAD region 35 years ago, and our governance structure, how did it look like? And I agree that the transition is taking place not only in climate change, but also in governance. 30 years ago,
Doctor,
Ethiopia,
we have to wrap up.
All right, thanks. Ethiopia had liberation movement that fought and came to power by military means. Uganda, National Resistance Army, came by military means. Sudan was military government. Rwanda was liberation movement. Eritrea, liberation movement. Which country have I not mentioned? Sudan, Congo, liberation movement. Only Kenya probably had very few fights here and there. So if you look at ourselves from 30 years ago, we started with liberation movement everywhere. And now at least some countries have moved forward. Now some countries have gone back like Sudan. And some countries have never changed with one leadership like Eritrea. So how do we put all that in terms of governance and begin to look at our challenging issues of climate change, climate security and governance and all that we are talking about. So that is already in transition, but we must also look at adaptation, resilience, and all that in the environment that we are facing today.
Thank you. We're closely running out of time, so if you could also just final thoughts as you answer the quick question on ecosystem.
Yeah, I'll take one of the questions and then final thoughts and leave the rest for Tai. I'll take 50% of Susie's question and 50% of the question here, only because Susie's question also starts with a confession. I confess that one of the things I'm most proud of in my life is having grown up in a country that was at one point in time socialist. I remember working with the Ethiopian government on a project in Afar, and one of the government officials from the highlands, through his translator, asked one of the Afar camel nomads, how would you translate proletariat into Afar? And he was appalled when there was no translation for proletariat in Afar. But there was an understanding of someone who had been dispossessed, someone whose only means of earning a livelihood was selling labor to the market. So many times we find that communities may not have the exact wording for whatever's the buzzword right now, but they do have a good understanding that something has changed, be it in the climate, be it in conflict that they're grappling with. So I think you find this a lot. On the question about nature-based solutions, it's a funny situation you find the third world in. And I think that because we are net importers of technology, we're at times net importers of ideas. So you find there's a lot more take-up of nature-based solutions in the north. You hear English people talking about it, you hear Russians talking about it, it's the buzzword there. But here, we're expecting some high technology solution because we import technology, we're expected to import ideas. And this happens many times with the partners who are working on climate change. They will bring you the slickest high-tech solution that requires inputs from Germany, from Siemens, from Pfizer, when the lady who has been tending to goats for generations is telling you the way to do it is this way, but nobody wants to listen to her. So we have to get out of that mindset. We have to get out, as the socialists would say, we have to get out of being consumer proletariats to be proletariats who are exporting our own ideas to the north. I think that's one of the key things. I'll close on this. And this, again, I'll show my age. This doesn't reflect on Dr. Sunday because he's a much younger man than I am. But I remember a movie from the 90s, Jerry Maguire, and the catchphrase was, "Show me the money." I'm yet to see the money. There is a lot of talk from the north on climate change. There's a lot of talk on financing. There is no money. The amounts that are being put forward are small. It is difficult to get it as a third worlder, and it doesn't match the scale of the crisis that you as northerners have created. This is not our crisis. This is yours. China, India, Russia is another third world country. They're now jumping onto the pollution bandwagon. But the last 200 years of high levels of pollution and changes within the environment has been caused by the Western states, who now look at it as if these are our crisis and our problem to do with a fluctuating climate that has nothing to do with the Industrial Revolution. Until we get out of that mindset, we will not have equality. And until there is equality, it will be very difficult for us to sit face to face with you without coming as angry third worlders around what you have done to the planet and what you expect us to pick up the check for. I'll close on that not incredibly positive note.
Thank you, Kwesi. Basically, that is a kind of answer to the question that arrived from the participant. Basically, there are a number of initiatives within the AU, but they are relatively new and they are still yet gearing up. For example, at the end of this year, we are expecting the publishing of the chairperson's report on the nexus between peace and security. And we have our Department of Agricultural, Rural Economy and Environment. They publish a climate action plan that is going to look into these different hotspots. But again, in order to come to different actions and responses, it requires financing. And when it comes to that action, there is no tendency to act on it. We are actually looking for some kind of easy financing that may channel in. And the very idea of this climate financing is creating some kind of, I can say, laziness in our own structures in such a way that we are looking at it, even if it is never coming. We are just looking at it, and we create some kind of competition among ourselves with something that is yet to arrive. Okay, instead of looking for possible alternatives that may happen, let's say engagement with business people, okay, different entrepreneurs that are happening or there in the community that are also being affected. Okay, therefore we can utilize different mobilization strategy, but the leadership tend to wait for something that yet to arrive instead of looking for that. But the easiest possible solution is actually to look for possible scenario where we can adapt what is available and try to give a kind of fix to the problem. But even if the problem is very much visible, nobody has got the courage to look into those alternatives, because there is this buzzword financing, climate financing, and endless scopes that are always being a gathering of people. Therefore, we should really tend to ask for the money if it comes, or if not, we need to find alternative ways. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking this excellent panel, and we're going to wrap it up there.